a crazed woman on a forum on CNN at the climate forum where the candidates are getting up there instead of having a debate. They're just having a forum where people from the audience ask them questions and they answer the questions from the audience. In a climate forum, a woman who I honestly think it's a plant, or if the very least is somewhat crazed. And I was at a Bernie meeting when we were watching this, and I turned to my wife and said, "What the hell is this?" A crazed woman asked Bernie Sanders about population control. Essentially, Thanos. We need to curb and cut the population. This is such a weird, out of the blue question that none of the other candidates, if I'm not mistaken, was asked any kind of random shit like this. CNN is hostile enemy territory. And at various points in the debate, Anderson Cooper, who gave Joe Biden a softball, "Okay, Joe Biden, here's your question. I'm not really going to push back on you at all on this question, even though you are saying stuff that really should be pushed back on." But with Sanders, always trying to get a very particular framing so you can have that soundbite of Sanders says that there's going to be sacrifice among all Americans. That type of stuff. It was positioned that way multiple times. So Sanders, looking out for this stuff, for the most part, cut his language in a way that tries to prevent CNN from using any kind of out there sound bites to knock down what he was saying or to misrepresent what he was saying. Problem. The crazy lady that is talking about population and the way Bernie Sanders answered this question may be potentially problematic if it is misconstrued and used in a way that is misconstrued. Bernie Sanders is talking about one thing, but ultimately what that woman asked him is something a little bit different. She's talking about population control, like Thanos. And his answer, it's something to be desired. I'll tell you what I mean. Welcome to the Soapbox After Dark. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Like I said, Soapbox After Dark. Guys, if you dig this content, you find yourself coming back to this channel often, please like, share, subscribe. Of course, you can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. YouTube demonetizes all of these videos. It's pretty much just offhand at this point. So, this show is honestly brought to you by you. So at some point, they turn them on, but at that point, you're like several thousand views in. It is aggravating. You have no idea how aggravating it is. Nevertheless, let's do the news. This video is not going to be long. This video is going to be relatively quick, actually. Bernie Sanders, Climate Forum. Bernie Sanders has the most ambitious plan to deal with the climate emergency of anybody who's on this stage or who's to come on the stage. $16 trillion with a T. And if you say, "Oh my God, Bernie, that's a big number," he says, "That's an asteroid. It's going to hit the goddamn planet. Are you really going to quibble about dollars?" Because ultimately, he has scientists to back him up when he makes that particular argument. Now, if there's a situation where you don't know if you're going to be able to pay rent next week, if there's a situation where you think you're going to lose your job, if there's a situation where you're going to have difficulty with childcare, the climate thing is going to matter less to you. However, if those things are dealt with, the climate thing starts to matter more. Just in polling, when people have a bit of economic freedom, meaning they're a little bit more comfortable, then the climate thing matters more. They can pop their head up and say, "Oh, whoa, yeah, I want to be around. Life is not too bad right now. I want to be around. Let's talk about this climate thing." So, this asteroid that's going to hit the planet, Sanders is saying we need to have transformational change in this country to deal with this. And we can't quibble about dollars over something that requires transformational change. And he's talking about jobs and everything else just in the pursuit of doing this particular thing. CNN took the angle multiple times of, well, are people going to have to change, Bernie? Are people going to have to stop doing what they're doing now, Bernie? People may not like that, Bernie. And it's like, there's an asteroid that's going to hit the planet. You agree with me there's an asteroid that's going to hit the planet. You even have climate crisis in big, bold letters back here. And you're asking me, are people going to have to make some adjustments to the fact that they've been living in ways that is adversely affecting life on the entire planet? Yes, they will have to make some changes and concessions. Otherwise, what are we talking about? All of this, the crisis in this case, is really brought on by, for the most part, 70% of it is bought on by like 10 corporations or something like that, or 100 corporations. So this thrusting the blame onto people like recycle and this type of stuff, I think people should do those things, but let's be honest that the blame does not necessarily lie with the public itself. All things being equal, companies create this particular problem just in pursuit of capitalism because environmental stuff matters less than making a dollar. But we've prioritized that. That's something that gets prioritized. Sanders is saying that needs to stop. And in the way we go about our affairs, to some degree, may need to change, and because that may need to stop. That doesn't necessarily mean your life, oh God, we have a burden. That doesn't even necessarily mean that your life all that much changes. But if you're asking him, do we need to make certain adjustments in order to ensure that our grandkids will be in existence on a planet that is still habitable and is not going to deteriorate rapidly? That answer, I think, is yes. And that answer, if you care about life on this planet, should be okay. It should be okay. And by the way, by definition, it's better. Cleaner environment, more jobs. Do you realize the argument of let's ensure that you have solar panel on your houses means that the government is assisting you in getting solar panel on your house, which means that your house becomes independent of the grid to some degree. You may even give energy back to the grid. And if you have batteries added, then you have a system that for the most part don't need the grid. When it's sunny outside, it takes the energy in, stores it in the battery. When it's chilly or when it's nighttime, the battery goes, and then 8 hours later, the sun is back up and you're back on. You're energy sufficient. That's what he's talking about for the houses in America. And then having jobs of people to be able to install those things. By definition, what he's trying to do just creates jobs and everything else in the process. I mean, I guess my point is, taking the angle of, oh wow, are we going to change, is less relevant to the conversation of what are going to be the benefits of taking this particular strategy over some other strategy. This woman, however, apparently not reading Bernie Sanders' climate bill, the bee in her bonnet of all the things that avail us is not climate exactly, but population. We need to do something about all these people that are just procreating around the country. This woman looks like a plant. She looks like a crazy maniac, and she's screaming about climate. I don't like the way Bernie Sanders answers this, because I think he should have been a bit more derisive in his answer. It is utterly ludicrous of what she's asking. He answers this not in the way that she is asking this, but he answers this in a different way. But it still comes across a little weird. Are you brave enough, Bernie Sanders, to talk about the fact that all of these people, particularly these poor people, keep making babies? And we need to stop these people from making babies. Do you agree with this, and are you man enough to take this on, Bernie Sanders?
Sure, from New Milford, Connecticut. Martha, welcome.
Good evening. Human population growth has more than doubled in the past 50 years. The planet cannot sustain this growth. I realize this is a poisonous topic for politicians, but it's crucial to face. Empowering women and educating everyone on the need to curb population growth seems a reasonable campaign to enact. Would you be courageous enough to discuss this issue and make it a key feature of a plan to address climate catastrophe?
Now, think before you answer that. She even said this is a poisonous topic for politicians. Are you going to be Thanos and do something about this population growth? That woman is a lunatic. Fact of the matter is, population growth is not your issue. Capitalism, to some degree, is your issue. This notion of infinite growth is your issue. All of things are your issue. Those people who are growing, the United States is an outlier in regards to the amount that we waste and we consume. The way we use our products, meaning planned obsolescence, meaning this laptop in like a year is going to be thrown away, in which case all of the minerals and supplies and everything else that was mined out the ground is just going to go into some kind of landfill. That is wasteful, dramatically wasteful. I'm making the point that we live in particular ways that is entirely and utterly wasteful. And in living that way, it becomes impossible for your planet to sustain that type of lifestyle and having large amounts of populations. And to just make a point on this, those populations that are dirt poor, because the majority of the planet is dirt poor. The majority of the planet doesn't live like we live in the United States. Even the poorest person in the United States doesn't live like the dirt poor person living in Africa or some of these other countries. We, in the West, live in a certain degree of affluence. That is not true. Most of the places in the world live on like, $10 a day. I don't even think it's that much. With a third of the world, if I am not mistaken, living off around $2 a day. And this is at a time where Jeff Bezos, by himself, has enough wealth to get rid of poverty all over the world. The issue here, if I would so gently point out to her, is not that you can't necessarily sustain the population growth. The issue here is that wealth is being held in the hands of a very few people. And instead of having a society that grows to the benefit of the society itself, because you realize that the moment that people start to get a certain degree of affluence, they stop having kids. Their population growth declines. I guess my point is, your issue here is that wealth is held in very tiny hands. And that all of these poor societies, poor people, the majority of the population, does not get to live in any level of affluence or non-vulnerability. Because that wealth is held within the hands of a very few. Even the technology that we make is held in the hands of a few. Our society is always held back by somebody getting a buck. So in the case of something like Uber, that's held in the hands of a top 1%er. When that becomes an automation thing and it just goes by itself, that will be held in the hands of 1%. Energy markets, healthcare, all of these things. We're talking about technology that we ourselves oftentimes invest in. Gets, again, held in the hands of a very few people, privatized. The issue is that the wealth is not shared. The issue is that the way we do our technology is that it is not used to the benefit of humanity per se. It is used to the benefit of somebody to earn a buck. It's used to the benefit of them to earn a buck. The issue is not the population. That's my point. This is the Thanos question. Thanos has the glove. With that glove, he decides to wipe out half of the population in the universe, missing the point that the glove gives him absolute control of space, matter, and time, and that he could have made hamburgers for each and every person across the entire universe. Technology was the way out, meaning the glove is an allegory for technological development. If your society used technology in ways that was to the benefit of humanity and live us in a different, sustainable way, not even drastically different per se, but with a consciousness towards sustainability, creating technology and creating these things with endpoints where we can deal with them in a way that doesn't necessarily just go to trash. We can sustain life on this earth. We choose not to. There's a difference in those things. This notion that we need to stop people from growing and populating and all this other stuff, that's nonsense. The issue has to do with the way wealth is distributed and how technology is used, whether it's used for the benefit of a 1% or benefit of mankind. Up to this point, it's for the 1%. So you look at the world and say, well, yeah, we need to stop having kids. We need to stop having kids. As opposed to looking at the world and saying, yeah, all of that wealth is being locked up in the hands of a very few people, and we need to get rid of poverty around the world. And when we get rid of poverty around the world, to some degree, there are going to be cascading effects on the amount of kids that the people have, because they're not going to be necessary if you deal with public services and ensuring that they are intact. But yeah, let's talk birth control. Yeah, it's totally birth control. That's the issue.
Well, Martha, the answer is yes. And the answer has everything to do with the fact that women in the United States of America, by the way, have a right to control their own bodies and make...
That's not what she's asking. That's what I mean. That's not what she's asking. Listen to her question. Her question, again, Crazed population control. That's what she's asking. Are you going to be brave enough to make the argument that we need to do something about the number of people that are being populating this planet? And since we only make up 5% of the world, she's not talking about us. She's talking about third world countries. Those darkies over there, those poor darkies, keep having kids. And the issue is poverty. The issue is not population control. There's a difference in those things. This planet can sustain the level of population provided we lived in a different way that was organized to sustain the level of population. But we don't organize ourselves around sustaining human growth and human health and human happiness and those things. We organize around how can we make a buck and dominance and those type of things. So part of the world gets shafted. They become the population that builds our products, builds our tools, and lives at a lower standard of living that allow us to live in the way that we live. It is Hunger Games in a weird way, especially if you were not living in the United States. She's not asking about birth control and a women's rights issue. She's asking about population control as an outright thing from the standpoint of dealing with climate change. If you cut down the number of people who are breeding, then we can somehow do something about climate. Listen to her question and listen to the way he answers. He answers this is out of whack.
Empowering women and educating everyone on the need to curb population growth seems a reasonable campaign to enact. Would you be courageous enough to discuss this issue and make it a key feature of a plan to address climate catastrophe?
Well, Martha, the answer is yes.
Empowering women and population growth has more than doubled in the past 50 years. The planet cannot sustain this growth. I realize this is a poisonous topic for politicians, but it's crucial to face. Empowering women and educating everyone on the need to curb population growth seems a reasonable campaign to enact. Would you be courageous enough to discuss this issue and make it a key feature of a plan to address climate catastrophe?
Sanders' answer should be no. The issue, Martha, is not that people are procreating in this way. The issue has to do with poverty and the fact that wealth is held within the hands of a very few people. If those people had access to that wealth, we could get rid of poverty all the world over. And to some degree, this notion and the qualms that you have about these people procreating at expeditious rates, to some degree, just like in our country, will probably go down. We have the capacity to take care of everybody on this planet if technology was used to the benefit of the people of this planet. Our issue is not population growth. Our issue is the way we organize ourselves, the way we organize our markets, the way we organize the distribution of goods, the way we organize our even usage of technology and the benefits from that technology, even the reasons for the creation of that technology. Meaning the technology is not done for the benefit of the society itself, it's done for somebody to make a buck. If it just so happens to benefit the society, then oh well, good. But the goal of it is to make a buck. Those are our issues, not the population growth. That's what Bernie Sanders should have said. Bernie Sanders didn't say that. Bernie Sanders said this.
Well, Martha, the answer is yes. And the answer has everything to do with the fact that women in the United States of America, by the way, have a right to control their own bodies and make reproductive decisions. And the Mexico City Agreement, which denies American aid.
By the way, notice the label below him. Would you, Bernie Sanders, be courageous enough to curb population growth and make it a key feature of your climate plan? As Bernie Sanders is going to cut down on the population and tell government funded cutting down on the population of people. And how are you going to do that, Bernie Sanders? And is that really what you want under you, with your answer being in the affirmative of yes? Just saying.
Aid to those organizations around the world that allow women to have abortions or even get involved in birth control, to me, is totally absurd. So I think, especially in poor countries around the world, where women do not necessarily want to have large numbers of babies, and where they can have the opportunity through birth control to control the number of kids they have, something I very, very strongly support.
I wish you didn't answer that question in that way. That's all. I really wish he did not answer that question in that particular way. It's not so much that there's anything entirely wrong with the contextual way that he's saying it. I mean, after all, his point is, look, women need to have control of their bodies. And part of having control of their bodies is having access to birth control. If they indeed want to cut down on the number of children that they have, then yeah, they should have access to birth control. And I am all for women, regardless of the country they're in, having access to that, because that allows them to have an affirmative control of their life. He spoke about it as a women's rights issue. She wasn't talking about it entirely in the women's rights issue way. And again, if you notice, the little label that CNN had below him answering would you be courageous enough to discuss curbing population growth? Bernie Sanders. With Bernie Sanders saying yes. But again, that's not technically the question that Sanders was answering. However, that was the question that he was asked. That is the last thing you want to be stuck saying. If you want to make the argument that, look, I think it's a women's rights issue for people to have access to control of their bodies, but no, I think it's absurd with the notion of curbing population growth. That's not our issue. We have issues with, and making the case from there. I mean, this really is the Thanos argument. Thanos has technological development. Thanos decides to use that technology to kill half of the universe, as opposed to using technology to feed the other half of the universe. He could have did both. His perspective of the world only allowed him to go in one particular direction. I'm saying the same thing is true here. Yes, we should curb population growth. I don't doubt that that's not necessarily a thing. But there is something also to be said for this notion of our society itself disallows or makes it difficult to do something that we could, if we prioritize, could do. We could take care of each and every person on this planet. If the resources of this planet was unlocked for the people of this planet, this conversation goes away. Maybe this conversation could be held in the context of if the world stays the way it is, and if the other countries wanted to try to live like America, and if. You can do that, I suppose. All I'm saying is Bernie Sanders is going to get hit for this. And what do you know? I didn't even know this page existed. And Bernie Sanders getting hit for it. The woman was a plant. I don't know that as a flat fact, but if I had to guess it, a crazed lunatic asking Bernie Sanders about population control looks like a plant to me. I could be wrong. I'll cut this video to make sure that the other part is not necessarily a part of this video, but that was a weird answer. Bob Ramirez, see nothing nefarious. Whatever. Are you serious, Bob? Are you bullshitting me? Washington Examiner is a right-wing site. Yes, it is. It is. That's my point. They're hitting him for this. I mean, this is something that they're going to cast a particular way. Look, it's not that what Sanders said was wrong. Sanders is answering this question in the context of women's rights. But the question wasn't asked in those terms. And ultimately, what it looks like is Bernie Sanders is saying, yes, I am all for population control of third world countries. That's what it comes across as. Even though, contextually, that's not really where it goes. This right-wing rag, right off the bat,